Why, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. My name is DB333, and welcome back to Hearts Run for the New Last Days of Europe as RK Ostafrika. Now, last video, we hopped in, kind of realized we peculiar little situation we're in, and giving some southern land grants, which actually seem to be a somewhat reasonable idea on paper, so I'm worried to see how it's going to end up playing out. But here we are. The drums echo. Shit. Sorry, just cracked my back. Hansu took rose, as he always did, at the stroke of 5 o'clock, following his rigorous morning exercises and his simple and nutritious breakfast of porridge and fruit. He donned his freshly pressed uniform and flung open the doors to his office, where he would work until the moon shone bright in the night sky. After turning on the many fans scattered around the room, Hudik strode to his desk. As he sat, he heard the horrible creak from the chair that made his teeth rattle and his temples pulse. Scowling, his morning already thrown into disarray, he made a mental note to have the slave who had failed in the oh-so-simple task of fixing the chair flogged. Ignoring the pulsing headache he was already beginning to develop, he unfurled a map of sub-Saharan Africa and, taking his pen, began to circle settlements and military installations on the border with South Africa. Hudig did not think himself a fool. He knew the fragile peace between the Rex colonies and South Africa was tenuous at best. Though supposedly determined to maintain their neutrality, South Africa's Anglo-Saxon government found itself racked by internal tension caused by the rebellious Boers and natives, which they were unable to resolve as a consequence of their pathetic degeneracy. The South African government increasingly maintained its precarious clutch on the nation thanks to aid from the OFN, who were busy digging their claws into the allegedly neutral nation. An OFN aligned to South Africa was an unacceptable threat to the Reich's interest in Africa. Hutig began to draw arrows towards Petersburg and Nelspruit. The fragile peace would not last much longer. When the war came, he would be ready. It echoed loudly in him, because he was hollow at the core. Well, this is a heck of a day. Yeah, heck of a choice I had to, heck of a choice I made deciding to record this nation specifically. But hey, here we are. I guess I'll fill you in on a little bit of where I've been. I was actually going to start recording this a few days earlier, along with some other stuff, but there's a big-ass fire about 30 minutes outside of the town I'm in. For those of you who don't know, I live in California, and California kind of has a problem where it keeps getting lit on fucking fire. So, yeah, hold on, I'll read this event first. The last thing the militia had expected was two white people, unarmed, wandering into the village from the thick of the bush. After managing to capture the village from Hudig's troops, the black rebels had bunkered down, repelling any enemies south that came too close, but none of them had been brave or foolish enough, like these two, who fell right in the hands of a rebel patrol. Screaming and pleading for mercy, they were dragged into the main square, to be lined up against the wall, and, much amusement of militia, never stopped taking film, even in their final moments. The leader of militia, a massive black man wearing a pair of German military sunglasses alongside a similarly improvised uniform, wanted to execute the two German scouts in person. Please, for God's sake, but not the Germans, one shouted, as the other kept filming despite numerous hands trying to grab the camera in his close. We're shooting a movie, a movie. Quickly he produced full documents from his pocket. Regno d'Italia, said the letters on the exterior. The rebel leader squinted, struggling to read the document. Jaco Petty? A few minutes later, the rebel leader, whom Noms de Guerre was Simba, was treating the two Italians no longer as intruders, but as welcomed guests. With a smile on his face, he showed the two around the village, especially the places where the fighting had happened, where the grim remnants of a fallen German garrison and their collaborators will lay to rot. Our people will be free, Simba proclaimed before the camera with a wide grin, gesturing towards the impaled skull of a German soldier, still wearing his Stahlhelm, now serving as a decoration for the village's main entrance. All of Africa will be free one day. That evening, Jacopetti talked with a few of Simba's men, all farmers, simple people, driven to rebellion by desperation, as they sped towards the Sud-West African border on a loaded German jeep. Simba was kind enough to compensate with a ride of the two Italians, who would soon consign him and his man to the fame they deserved. Sud-West Africa beacons. Interesting. So yeah, California's on fire, which it usually is, because we don't have much in the way of water. Global warming isn't helping that. And yeah, so good old Cali is, it alternates areas where it decides to light on fire, but it's still on fire. Fair is not just us. I think Idaho, Washington, Oregon, they're also on fire right now. So it's not just us. But, yeah, it's a little rough. And when a fire starts about 30 minutes away from you, you really get worried. So, luckily it's more or less contained. Now, they had evacuation orders, but for some places, but they've been lifted, so I think it's more or less back to normal, which is nice, because I was not looking forward to having to pack up all my shit and run. As stonily impassive as a marble statue, Hutig stared across his desk at Clifford DuPont, General Bureau Representative for West Africa's minority of British colonists and exiles. All shrunken and wrinkled, he reminded Hutig of a piece of fruit that had been left in the sun for too long. Shivering in the Arctic fragility of Hutig's office, DuPont was reading the treaty that had been drafted by Hutig's underlings. It would give the Angles gifts of land to develop in the uncolonized interior in exchange for total and unwavering loyalty to the Reich and a public endorsement of National Socialist values. Privately, he thought it was too lenient. The Angles had long been a simmering pot just waiting to boil over, and Germania wanted to give them land. On the other hand, he supposed, Ostafrika had vast tracts of land that, when cleared, would make fantastic farmland. Perhaps they'd prove beneficial to the Reich's prosperity as long as he kept them within an iron grip. Hutig had to stop himself from smiling as DuPont finished reading and deflated like a punctured balloon. If he had had his way, the degenerate Anglos would be deep in the coal mines instead of putting on a show of still being important dignitaries, but forcing them to dance along to his tune like marionettes was the next best thing. Signing the treaty would commit Ostafrika's Anglos to Hutig and the National Socialist cause, in ink at least, giving him legitimacy to persecute them should they ever stray from the path. He knew DuPont and his cronies secretly wished to undermine his rule, cast him down, and take his realm for their own. Feelings of suspicion coiled around him like a boa constrictor. Hutig wanted nothing more than to send his rotting old would-be backstabber to the camps with the rest of the traitors. But until he got the go-ahead from Germania, all he could hope for was to keep them under the jackboot. DuPont, of course, had no choice but to sign. Recording. If it was written, I should be loyal to the nightmares of my choice. Well, it's not quite so good. Okay. What do we want to do next? Let's give the Boer some support staff. The Boers have proven to be ardent supporters of our cause, but no matter how brave, they are extremely inefficient soldiers. Lacking training, equipment, and skilled officers, in order to ensure the success of a righteous uprising against the decadent capitalist overlords, we shall send support staff to the Boers. Crates of supplies, military instructors, and small units of trained soldiers will help them to hold the line until they fill the gap with our baseline soldiers. Yeah, that one makes sense. We can promote some loyalists as well. A little bit of war support. Might be pretty nice. Let's go for it. But yeah, so that was going on. So that's one of the reasons I didn't come back a little bit sooner. But no, I'm still back. And something that is very, very nice. Donda has dropped. Connie's new album dropped earlier today. And didn't want to listen to that, but I figured it's probably for the best to just go ahead, record a little bit first. We have no construction speed, Jesus. We don't have any free factories, I think. No. And the infrastructure is dog shit anyway, so we can't build much. In fact, do we not? We don't have any infrastructure in Zanzibar, my god. Anyway, bewildered by the incompetence of the men he was training, Captain Marcus Wiedemann rued his misfortune. When he'd been called into the major's office and told he'd been handpicked for an enviable assignment that gave him the opportunity to serve the Reich, he swelled with pride, picturing himself leading the charge against rebels in the interior. Instead, he'd ended up teaching idiotic Boer farm boys where the trigger was on their K98Ks. Stalking up and down the line, watching his men completely fall to their targets, Captain Wiedemann wondered if the assignment was punishment for some forgotten slight. To his mind, the men of Herziga Nationale Party were nothing more than foolish, disorderly rabble with a heritage of unclear Aryanism. Unfocused, untrained, and undisciplined, they were little better than the barbaric partisans and rebellious slaves. He had the incredibly unenviable task of whipping a mob of sunburned yokels into a disciplined fighting force foisted upon him. It was utterly ludicrous, and yet he'd had no choice but to accept his fate and slip into South Africa, eventually arriving at the HNP's secret training camp in a desolate valley where every breath filled his lungs with a thick coating of red dust. As he watched one of the Boers look down the barrel of a gun to check if it was loaded, Captain Wiedemann wondered how Reichskommissar Huttig had ever come upon the idea of the HNP could be useful in coming war as anything other than cannon fodder. Sighing as one of the Boers narrowly missed shooting himself in the foot, Captain Wiedemann called for a break and went to wash the dust from his throat with a lukewarm beer. It had been looking at the image of its own tenebrous and passionate soul. Let's go ahead and get some infrastructure. Help me to help you. Our Boer friends are fighting just like us against remnants of decadent imperialist nations. While poorer than the average South Africans, they show the typical Aryan bravery that made us win the last war. We should ensure that they are compensated for that. As a reward for their efforts, we shall institute the Deutscher Rhodesian Baufonds, a bond program to help the Rhodesian in land that we will leave to our erstwhile allies after the war. Surely they'll be grateful for that. We will begin a long and fruitful cooperation. Sure, nothing bad will happen. Related to that? Totally not. Promote some more loyalists. Let's go ahead and do that. Although it says it's supposed to boost my war support, and I don't think it has. So I think we'll just get some steel. Save our political power for now. Liquid reserves. Put more of that into the economy. Shielding his eyes from the harsh morning sun, James Cumberdale squinted down the driveway at the cloud of dust drifting in the wake of the family Volkswagen as his wife took Godfrey to school in Fort Victoria. Sipping tea off a balcony of the platform estate that he had been his father's and his father's before him, James enjoyed the warmth of the rising sun, loosening his rheumatic joints as he gazed over the fields of swaying hemp, stretching as far as the eye could see. Soon would be time to wake the slaves. Finishing his tea, James stepped indoors to the drawing room to reread the telegram he had received the prior afternoon. Try as he might, he couldn't find the hidden catch. According to the provisional telegram, the Reichskommissar had approved the provision of additional funds for British planters to exploit undeveloped lands for their mutual prosperity. The Deutscher Rhodesian Baufund, they called it. If James hastily learned German served him right, it translated as the German Rhodesian Building Fund. James sunk into his most comfortable chair, reading it, spreading himself around until he felt comfortable. Then he read it again. Life under the Nazis hadn't been as bad as he'd been expecting. For the most part, they left the British colonists and the new Reichskommissariat alone. But there had always been an underlying tension between the British and their new German overlords. And yet, as of late, they'd been oddly conciliatory. First, they'd permitted English-language radio broadcasts. Then they'd granted British planters vast tracts of land in exchange for a meaningless pledge of loyalty that he had happily given. They'd even given him a free television set where Godfrey liked to plant himself on the weekends when he should have been doing his Aryan biology homework. The Reichskommissar never did anything out of the goodness of his heart, so what exactly did he expect to get out of this? Slipping the telegram into his suit pocket, James stepped outside to watch his overseers herd slaves into the fields. In his grandfather's time, all this land had been untamed. If these funds came through, perhaps they'd give him the chance to stamp his own mark on Africa. This also has been one of the dark places of the earth. Well, we have some nice infrastructure at least. That's nice. I'll take it. And for now, let's booby-trap the border. With the war looming closer every day, we need to actively prepare for the worst. While the other Reichskommissariats, it feels an insult to the office Hutig represents even call them as such, have done nothing, we are prepared. In order to slow the enemy advance until we can fully mobilize our scattered forces and inflict as many losses to the enemy without any on our part, we will disseminate the border with dozens of large minefields and wiretap most bridges and where roads the enemy might use against us. The border actively booby-trapped, the OFN will think twice before entering our realm. Oh, the surprises we have in store for them. Ongoing Civil War. We're almost getting out of our little steel deficit, which is nice. I think I'll buy some oil from Germany as well. That'll be a nice little pickup. Promote loyalists, but that's not going to do anything, so let's not worry about that. Wonder, can we give these guys any promotion? Let's look at Arthur. Let's give him infantry expert. That'll be a good one. Brazil's won the World Cup. Let's do offensive doctrine, because we're really only doing one big war, and I think that's it. So it doesn't even matter. The Reichskommissar sat on the balcony of his palace, watching the slaves meander through his still, tenebrous gardens as the freshness of twilight chilled the sweat moistening his heavy woolen uniform. Taking a moment to look up from the map sprawled over the table, he felt a thrill of quiet accomplishment run through him as he gazed upon the orderliness of his design. Soon all of Ostafrika would be remade in his image, ordered, disciplined, efficient, and everything and everyone in the proper place. Until the dawn of that golden future, however, there was work to be done. Tearing himself away from the view, Hutig focused his attention back to the pile of maps, already darkening as the light faded. He would have to order a slave to bring him a lantern. He was enjoying the evening serenity too much to return to his office. With a single ivory finger, he traced the border between Ostafrika and South Africa. The border that, when his carefully laid plans come to fruition, would cease to exist. Nevertheless, although his troops were better disciplined, trained, and equipped than the South African rabble, he was not fool enough to think victory a certainty until the flag of the Reich was raised over Cape Town. Until he devised contingency after contingency, should the unthinkable come to pass and the enemy push into Ostafrika. In case that ludicrous plausibility came to pass, he had ordered the entire border mined and riddled with traps to cut down the advancing forces of the enemy. Nowhere was left open for degenerates to enter Ostafrika unscathed. With their forces getting blown apart like sausages in a pan for every step they took, their forces would get slowed sufficiently for Hutig's crack troops to crush their advance and push them to the sea. Hutig turned his head to look at the distant, dusty horizon. Any day now the degenerates and subhumans could come. He could almost see the simian horde pressing over the hills. When they came, they'd find him waiting for them. The stillness of life did not in the least resemble a peace. Okay, so we can booby trap the border. War is coming, and at times the best offense is a good defense. Arrogance cannot dictate our military strategy in the battle to come, so we must be prepared for the possibility of losing territory along the border of South Africa. As such, by booby-trapping our border region as much as possible, we can attempt to ensure that even should our forces be pushed back, the enemy will find their infrastructure utterly crippled. Well, we can also test the gas. To clear a conflict is coming, we will be ready, and so will our weapons. Chemical stockpiles will be tested and modernized as necessary. Well, there we go. Didn't lose stability. We did gain some war support, though, finally. Okay, well. Fuck it. Let's kick the hornet's nest. South Africa is on the brink of full-scale anarchy. Between the Boer revolts, the Anglo fears for military losses, of native discontent, the rise of total collapse for the former Dominion grows every day, and we aim to give this rotten, crumbling edifice that fatal blow. By assassinating a prominent politician in broad daylight, the country will descend even more into political chaos as their political institutions squabble to save themselves from our ire. Okay, what are they doing right now? And that's going to be better for us, actually. Is that Tachanka? That is Tachanka. Well, that's kind of funny. Let's go ahead. Oh, Nixon, I don't know what you're doing. Let's go ahead and booby trap Maputo. Wreck your connection here. Alvaro's Che Guevara, he's free. It'll be neat to see the new events that are included with Cold Severn Springs. I'm curious to see what they'll be exactly. Kick the hornet's nest. Now let's go ahead. The production of consumer goods actually would be pretty decent. Yeah, let's do arms for Aryans. For war looming, we need to enact all our contingency plans. Our reserves shall be fully mobilized, and our armories will produce at full capacity no matter what the cost in slaves. Still, industrial capacity is limited, and we need to ask for help from our government in Germania. While we wait for supplies, we shall implement harsher training regimes and increase emergency measures so that we won't be caught unprepared by a sudden attack to our vulnerable areas. Well, there we go. I think we should begin an event sooner rather than later. Without kicking the hornet's nest. No? I guess not. Some better fighters, why not? Darkened room, somewhere in South Africa. The orange rays of afternoon slither in between the Venetian blinds. A thin, lean man with oiled, sandy blonde hair stands before a corkboard, puffing at a cigarette, the smoke rising to be whirled around the room by a violently rotating ceiling fan. The man cocks his head as he regards the corkboard. Outside of sounds of late afternoon traffic, but the man does not hear them, focused as he is on the intricacy of design. A dozen or so black and white portrait photographs, many of them taken from furtive angles, crowd the corkboard. White string wrapped around the pins of each photograph connects them to each other. One photograph in the center of the corkboard is connected to all the others. The subject is a middle-aged man with a pale, craggy face facing towards the camera. Smoker finished his cigarette and lit another. He moved closer to the corkboard, absorbed by the central photograph. The man's name on the photograph in black marker was Ian Smith, a former British colonist from Zimbabwe, who escaped into South Africa after the Reich had taken over. After building himself a new farm in Vryburg, Smith had vocally criticized the Reich Commissariat Hutig in the new regime, became a prominent advocate for the rights of the British colonists in exile in Ostafrika. In other words, he had become a nuisance. Unrolling the string and unpinning the photograph, the smoker slipped it into his jacket pocket. So, the Reich Commissariat wanted to stabilize South Africa for political assassination. Did he? Well, what better way to achieve that than assassinate one of the most publicly outspoken Anglos and pin it on the Boers? He picked up the telephone, dialing his handler in Quelimane, and doing so knocked down the first domino that would send South Africa spiraling into anarchy. How many powers of darkness claimed him for their own? But, well, we'll figure that out in time. Until then, I gotta cut it here, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you as always for watching. If you like this video, leave a like. If not, feel free to dislike. If you want to see more of this content in the future, hit the sub button from uploads every weekday, as well as occasionally Saturdays. If you have any comments, feedback, concern, leave them in the comment section below. I read all comments I get and appreciate any feedback you might have for me. If you want to chat, play games, anything of the sort, check out my Discord, down link below. If you want to send me bucks my month at Patreon, if you want to see me do sort of life for Twitch, I'll put you down in the description box below. Thank you as I was watching, ladies and gentlemen. My name has been DB333. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.